Chapter 13. Having gone to bed with such an image of devotion freshly burned in my brain, one might imagine my surprise the following morning when I discovered Sir Happy had vacated his post at the parlor window. At first, I thought Stephen had indeed arrived in the middle of the night, having utilized some sort of animal stealth to avoid waking the rest of the household. The more I thought about it, however, the less plausible the idea became. Knowing Sir Happy the way I do, I knew his greeting would have been anything but subtle and stealthy. As a matter of fact, Sir Happy's greetings tended to be more on the side of boisterous, with copious amounts of barking and a lion's share of exuberance, especially when it came to his Stephen. I felt certain had Stephen come home in the middle of the night, the entire household, and perhaps part of the rest of the neighborhood, would have been awakened. As it turned out, Sir Happy had spent the better part of the morning planning the day's activities.
"Good morning, old boy," said Sir Happy as I walked into the room. "I was just about to come in and wake you."
"I am very glad you did not," I said. Sir Happy's idea of waking someone was to get right up in their face and bark frantically, as though the very room was on fire. I have had more than one heart attack thanks to this particular technique. Ignoring my response, Sir Happy continued.
"We have much business to do today, Mommy, and the earlier we get about our business, the sooner we can be home."
With the imminent return of Stephen creeping ever nearer, I was astounded to find Sir Happy willing to leave the house. Anticipating my very confused private thoughts, he looked at me with a much wearied expression and said,
"I know what you are thinking, my friend. It disturbs you that I should be so willing to leave this house with my Stephen's arrival just a handful of hours away. My reason is quite simple. I cannot bear the waiting. My worries are crushing my spirit, and if I do not find something to occupy my mind, I shall go mad. There's nothing here for me to do. Thanks to Amelia's industry, there's nothing left to clean, and she has placed my books well out of reach, so I have no prospects of retrieving them, and thereby ruining the tidiness of the rooms she has cleaned. Please say you understand, my friend."
His eyes were filled with no small measure of pain, and I could deeply understand his motivation. I myself could not bear the thought of another empty day of waiting, so I gave my hearty assent to the notion of industry. My understanding for my friend's feelings was exactly what he needed, and as we discussed the day's plans together, it appeared as though some of the burden on his heart had lifted. Our goal for the morning was to follow up on the leads we received from our wall-eyed friend Horace. It was our hope to find some connection between McGibbons and the mysterious Mr. B by tracking down the location of McGibbons' dogfight. Horace was correct when he described the region of town in which the fight occurred. It was indeed a frightening place. The streets and alleyways were filled with some of the worst ilk London had to offer. There was a sinister look upon the grimy faces of many of the men and young boys as they sized up each passerby, hoping to locate some trinket, change purse, or keepsake which might be snatched for profit. In this part of town, everything fetched a price, including the very socks on your feet. It was a sickly place. There was not an alleyway or street corner which was not amassed with the poorest of the poor, coughing and wiping their mouths with the tattered remnants of the rags they wore, rags which had once been new and fashionable, but were now dingy and gray, lacking any resemblance to their previous form. One man eyed us exceedingly, as if he were debating having us for his next meal, since in this part of town meat was such a rare thing, anything which could be caught might find itself in the cooking pot, from sewer rats with their stinking, lesion-ridden skin to the lowliest common sparrow or pigeon. Every creature was worth consideration, and it was this reality which concerned me. Thankfully for us, very few of the people we came across were well enough to catch us, or else we might have had more trouble than we did. When we reached the address supplied to us by our feathered informant, we were not surprised to find the location abandoned and overtaken by squatters, who usually claimed whatever vacant buildings might be found to the advantage of the shelter 4 walls and a roof offered. Walking in and around the building, we could find no evidence which might bring us closer to finding our connection. To me, the smells were putrid and jumbled, but to Sir Happy's sensitive, trained nose, they were alive and filled with a million stories to tell. There was not a single crack, crevice, or pile of dirt which was left unsniffed. I learned from our first visit to Lexington Court crime scene never to interfere nor interrupt his work, and so I kept my distance and held my tongue until such time as I was certain it was safe to do otherwise. From the information gathered by Sir Happy, we learned that no fewer than a dozen or so dogs had been brought to this run-down shack. Some of them had been brought to fight each other, but some had been brought for ratting competitions, where the dogs are thrown into a rat pit with untold number of rats to see how many of the rats the dogs can catch and kill in a given time frame. It is a nasty business, especially if you happen to be a rat. The smell of old blood from both rat and dog alike was so strong, I thought a few times I would vomit from the stench, but not Sir Happy. One might think he was walking through a flower garden, surrounded by the most alluring fragrances that nature had to offer, rather than the dank stink which faced us now. He was undeterred and completely focused on what he was doing. It was only later when I discovered he was searching for any possible trace of the gentleman he smelled at Lexington Court. Unfortunately, he had no such luck, and after several hours of fruitless wanderings, we elected to go home. It was during our exit of this dreary and unpleasant neighborhood where we found ourselves in truly mortal danger. Upon exiting the abandoned building of the now forgotten dogfight, Sir Happy and I had gained the notice of a group of unsavory, brutish-looking street dogs. Their fur was matted with a host of foul and fetid substances, caked on bodies which were heavily scarred from countless battles and emaciated from a perpetual lack of food. Not unlike their human counterparts, these creatures survived off of whatever they could catch and eat. It was my guess they had banded together, finding a greater success by working together as a group, and unfortunately for Sir Happy and me, this group of ruffians had set their sights on us. The leader of this band of misfits was a one-eyed cur with a strong barreled chest. It was apparent to me by the considerable number of old and new scars on his face, he had won his position of authority by brute force alone, and the hold he had on the group as its leader was precarious at best. It would not have surprised me to discover he battled daily to maintain his status in the group. Most creatures forced to survive in such a ghastly way rotate leadership frequently, as each member attempts to assert control over the rest of the group. As with any band of thugs, the leader would receive a greater portion of the prize, whatever the prize may be. In the case of this pack, I imagine it meant the leader got to eat his fill first. There were a half-dozen or so dogs surrounding us as we set out from the run-down building, and from the looks of them, they had no intention of letting us pass. The one-eyed dog curled back his lips, showing his massive yellow teeth. Drool poured from the edges of his mouth in anticipation of his diabolical feast. "What have we here?" he said, grinning at Sir Happy and myself with no good purpose in his tone. "Looks to me, boys, as though we will eat well tonight. I've never seen such a fat cat in all my life. And look at what kind of a friend he has. Doesn't seem right to me, a cat and a dog walking together, does it?" The other scoundrels laughed in agreement, their muscles bunched and rippled beneath their filthy hides, ready to strike at a moment's notice. I turned to Sir Happy, wondering if this would be our last moment together. His fur was bristled and his eyes gleamed with a deep defiance. We might have been outnumbered, but I knew we would not go down without a fight. Sir Happy growled deeply as he replied,
"Who are you to question my friendship? This feline's company is far more welcome than your own. Consider moving on your way, and take your nasty little pups with you. Perhaps you will live to see another morning if you do."
It seemed an empty threat to me, being as outnumbered as we were, but I felt tremendous gratitude at the thought Sir Happy would risk his life to save my own. He might have had a chance to escape were he willing to leave me, but Sir Happy moved stubbornly closer to me, indicating his intent to stay by my side, regardless of the danger. As he did so, he whispered to me,
"Keep your wits about you, old boy, and be ready to run. Perhaps we'll get out of this situation yet."
I have never been a terribly active fellow, as is evidenced by my somewhat broadened waistline, but in that moment I found an energy I had never known before, one which I would desperately need if we were going to get out of this alive. I did my best to echo the aggressive stance of my companion, while at the same time swelling my fur to its furthest extent. Looking back now, I believe my appearance resembled that of an overplumped pillow, more so than a menacing danger to the group which then surrounded us, but I did what I could to appear ferocious, occasionally letting out my meanest sounding hiss. The giant dog laughed at my display and Sir Happy's warnings, as if my friend's words had come from a small pup instead of a fierce adversary.
"These two have spirit, I'll give 'em that," the big dog said. "It shall make our sport all the more entertaining."
The group began to close their ranks, reducing any hope of escape for us. The leader snapped at my face, just barely missing me by a whisker's width. His breath was foul with years of neglect, and it caused my eyes to sting and my heart to race. I struck back with the only weapon I had, my claws. What I lacked in fitness I made up for in accuracy, landing a clean and painful set of bloody stripes across his nose. It was a stinging blow, one which caused the others to hesitate in their forward movement. At their moment of hesitation, Sir Happy yelled out to me, "Run, Mommy, run!" as he launched himself at the underside of the group's leader. I have never seen anything so courageous in all my life. This small, oddly shaped dog jumping into the mouth of the proverbial lion to save the life of his friend. He clamped hold of the soft underbelly and held on for dear life, locking his jaws in the way only a dachshund could. They are badger dogs, as their names suggest, trained to hunt most ferocious creatures. Once a dachshund gains a grip upon their enemy, they will never let go, even if it means their death. My dear Sir Happy was doing this now, sacrificing himself for me. The sounds of painful torment and rage which bellowed forth from the mouth of our would-be attacker were like nothing I have ever heard before. Had the door of the underworld been thrown open, I doubt I would have heard anything so terrible as the cries of this foul creature. The pack instantly fell into confusion, uncertain what to do as their leader screamed in pain. A few attempted to dislodge Sir Happy, but in doing so only managed to inflict even greater pain upon Sir Happy's hapless victim. My friend was small enough and fast enough that the other dogs, with all of their bulk, could not maneuver close enough to lay hold of any part of his body. The leader began to teeter from the pain, and I knew if he went down, Sir Happy would be vulnerable to attack from above. I threw all sense out the window and jumped into the middle of the foray. What I could not reach with vicious claw, I grabbed with sharpened teeth, ignoring the rank smell and fetid taste which flooded my senses with every bite. I may be fat, but I am also fast and given to extraordinary spurts of agility when my life is in jeopardy. So loud was our struggle with these brutes, we began to draw a bit of a crowd as pedestrian and pilferer alike became mesmerized by our efforts. At one point, I felt the pressure from a set of gigantic jaws trying to close around my throat, but luckily a passerby had mercy and landed a solid blow to the head of the brute with a well-thrown piece of crockery. It gave me just enough time to jump clear of the beast's reach, only to land upon the back of his fellow with claws fully extended. My considerable weight was to my advantage, making it much harder for the fiends to knock me off of them again. As I slashed my way from dog to dog like a hissing, unholy red terror, Sir Happy maintained his death grip on his adversary, who continued to writhe under intense torment. I cannot say how long we remained locked in a battle for our lives, but I knew we could not maintain our efforts indefinitely, as I myself was growing weary by the fighting. It was then I saw our avenue of escape. During our struggles, one of the dogs had broken the circle, leaving open a straight shot out of the alleyway in which we were locked in combat. The confusion of the melee would be the perfect cover for us to make our escape, if only I could gain Sir Happy's attention. I maneuvered over to my friend and yelled as loudly as I could, "Leave off and follow me, for dear life's sake!" Sir Happy needed no further incentive, and we very quickly found ourselves racing down the alleyway with hell in all its furies fast on our heels. My lungs began to burn as I sucked wind in ragged, rasping breaths. I could run no more, but neither could I stop, knowing to do so would mean certain death. We ran on, dodging among the carts and people who lined the streets. I found my pace slowing as it became harder and harder to gasp for air. I looked to my companion, who seemed barely winded by our efforts, so sleek a form he created with every graceful bound. "I can go no further, my friend," I yelled to Sir Happy with what little air I had left in me. "My lungs fail me, and I have lost my wind." "Trust me, my friend, and go a little further," he yelled back. "I have an idea which just might save us, but be alert and watch so you do not become trampled." At first, I did not understand his meaning, but then I saw what lay ahead of us. Sir Happy was leading us directly into the cabbies' square, where cabbies for hire wait with horse and buggy for a fare to come along. The sudden appearance of Sir Happy and me, followed closely behind by a pack of very angry dogs, had the effect I think my friend was hoping for. The horses immediately began to grow restless, and when we broke through their line, they began neighing and jumping about. It very quickly became a dangerous playground, for every time we brushed past a horse's legs, it would kick out ferociously and begin bucking about as though its bonnet was filled with bees. This reaction worked in our favor, and before a handful of minutes had passed, several of the dogs had made contact with the unyielding force of the horse's hooves. It was not until we heard the very familiar cry of the lead canine that we felt any sense of safety. Clearing ourselves from the crush of the cabs, we turned back to examine our handiwork. All but one of the dogs had been taken down by the efforts of the horses, and even he was nursing an injured paw, which had been cruelly crushed beneath the considerable weight of one of the workhorse's hooves. He limped off in a direction away from us, leaving his wounded companions to fend for themselves. Our view of the ensuing mess was very quickly obscured by the press of cabbies trying to calm their beasts of burden. Sir Happy and I, winded and exhausted from our efforts to survive, elected to make a fast retreat in the direction of our home before any of our pursuers had a chance to collect themselves and find us within easy reach. Now that our lives were not in imminent danger, we decided it best to take stock of ourselves and look for any major injuries. Aside from the occasional bare spot where clumps of hair had been ripped out by the mouthful, I was in relatively good shape. I had some blood on my fur and my paws, but thankfully none of it was my own. Sir Happy was a little more scratched up, having suffered the abuse of several paws digging at him at the same time, but none were serious.
"That was a close call, Mommy, old boy," he said, a little winded, but with a twinkle in his eye. "Thank you for staying with me. I might not have made it out alive were it not for your heroic efforts."
Me? I inquired. You were the one who threw yourself into the jaws of death so I would have a chance to get away. I wish you could have seen the look of surprise and shock that went through the dog's one good eye when you grabbed hold of his soft underbelly.
"It looks something like this."
I did my best to imitate the face, an effort which sent Sir Happy into an uncontrollable fit of laughter, with me following quickly behind him.
"We make a great team, Mommy,"
he said, to which I replied, "We certainly do." Our greatest concern as we walked home was how Amelia would receive us, considering the fact we were both covered in dried blood, gobs of foul-smelling saliva, and no small amount of filth. I tried momentarily to work upon the grime and muck upon my own fur, but it truly was too disgusting to continue. We decided it would be better to allow Amelia her rant over our appearance, even to the point of subjecting ourselves to a bath, just so we would not have to suffer through our own personal grooming.
"You realize, of course," my companion said, "we shall never hear the end of this from Amelia. She will forever be reminding us of the time we came home looking like a couple of ragamuffins, so covered in grime she had to give us both a bath."
I laughed as I replied, "I would rather endure years of reminders than one more mouthful of that filth."